Section 35 of the South Pole. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Vera and Hill. The South Pole by Roald Amundsen. Translation by A.G. Carter. Section 35, Volume 2, Chapter 16. The Voyage of the Fram. The Oceanographical Cruise by First Lieutenant Thorvald Nielsen. According to the program, the Fram was to go on an oceanographical cruise in the South Atlantic, and my orders were that this was to be arranged to suit the existing circumstances. I had reckoned on a cruise of about 3 months. We should have to leave Buenos Aires at the beginning of October to be down in the ice at the right time, about New Year. As we were too short-handed to work the ship, take soundings, etc., the following 4 seamen were engaged: H. Halvorsen, A. Olsen, F. Steller, and J. Anderson. At last we were more or less ready, and the Fram sailed from Buenos Aires on June the 8th, 1911, the anniversary of our leaving Horten on our first hydrographic cruise in the North Atlantic. I suppose there was no one on board on June 8, 1910, who dreamed that a year later we should go on a similar cruise in the South. We had a pilot on board as far as Montevideo, where we arrived on the afternoon of the 9th. But on account of an increasing wind, Pampero, we had to lie at anchor here for a day and a half, as the pilot could not be taken off. On Saturday afternoon, the 10th, he was fetched off by a big tugboat, on board of which was the secretary of the Norwegian consulate. This gentleman asked us if we could not come into the harbour, as people would like to see the ship. I promised to come in on the way back, if we had time. On Sunday morning, the 11th, we weighed anchor, and went out in the most lovely weather that can be imagined. Gradually the land disappeared, and in the course of the evening we lost light. We were once more out in the Atlantic, and immediately everything resumed its old course. In order to save our supply of preserved provisions as much as possible, we took with us a quantity of live poultry, and no fewer than 20 live sheep, which were quartered in the farmyard on the port side of the vessel's foredeck. Sheep and hens were all together, and there was always a most beautiful scent of hay, so that we had not only sea air, but country air. In spite of all this delightful air, 3 or 4 of the crew were down with influenza, and had to keep their berths for some days. I reckoned on being back at Buenos Aires by the beginning of September, and on getting, if possible, 1 station a day. The distance, according to a rough calculation, was about 8,000 nautical miles, and I laid down the following plan: to go about east by north with prevailing northerly and northwesterly winds to the coast of Africa, and there get hold of the southeast trade. If we could not reach Africa before that date, then to turn on July 22nd, and lay our course with the southeast trade for St. Helena, which we could reach before August the 1st. From there again, with the same wind to South Trinidad, August 11th or 12th. On again with easterly and northeasterly winds on the southwesterly course until about August the 22nd, when the observations were to be concluded, and we should try to make Buenos Aires in the shortest time. That was the plan that we attempted. On account of fresh water from the river La Plata, we did not begin at once to take samples of water, and with a headwind northeast, we lay close hauled for some days. We also had pretty stiff breeze, which was another reason for delaying the soundings till the 17th. For taking samples of water, a winch is used, with a sounding line of, let's say, 5,000 meters, or 2,734 fathoms, on which are hung 1 or more tubes for catching water. We used 3 at once to save time. Now, supposing water and temperatures are to be taken at depths of 300, 400 and 500 meters, or 164, 218 and 273 fathoms. Apparatus 3 is first hung on about 3 meters or 10 fathoms from the end of the line, where a small weight hangs. Then it is lowered until the indicator wheel, over which the line passes, shows 100 meters or 54 fathoms. Apparatus 2 is then put on, and it is lowered again for another 100 meters, when apparatus 1 is put on and the line paid out for 300 meters or 164 fathoms. That is, until the indicator wheel shows 500 meters or 273 fathoms. The upper apparatus 1 is then at 300 meters or 164 fathoms, number 2 at 400 meters or 218 fathoms, and number 3 at 500 meters or 273 fathoms. Under apparatus 1 and 2 is hung a slipping sinker, about 8 centimeters or 3 1/4 inches long, and 3 centimeters or 1 1/4 inches in diameter. To the water samplers are attached thermometers and tubes arranged for the purpose. The water samplers themselves consist of a brass cylinder, about 38 centimeters or 15 inches long, and 4 centimeters or 1 1/2 inches in diameter. About half a liter of water, set in a frame. At about the middle of the cylinder are pivots, which rest in bearings on the frame, so that the cylinder can be swung 180 degrees, straight up and down. The cylinder, while being lowered in an inverted position, is opened at both ends, so that the water can pass through. But at its upper and lower ends are valves, working on hinges and provided with packing. When the apparatus is released, the cylinder swings round, and these valves then automatically close the ends of the cylinder. The water that is first caught in the cylinder at the required depth remains in it while it is being heaved up and is collected in bottles. When the apparatus is released, the column of mercury in the thermometer is broken, and the temperature of the water is read at the same depth as the water is taken from. The release takes place in the following manner. When all the cylinders have been lowered to required depths, they are left hanging for a few minutes, so that the thermometers may be set at the right temperature before the column of mercury is broken. Then a slipping sinker is sent down the line. When the sinker strikes the first apparatus, a spring is pressed, a hook which has held the cylinder slips loose, and the cylinder turns completely over. As it does this, the valves, as already mentioned, close the ends of the cylinder, which is fixed in its new position by a hook in the bottom of the frame. At the same instant, the slipping sinker that hangs under apparatus 1 is released, and continues the journey to apparatus 2, where the same thing happens. It is then repeated with apparatus 3. When they are all ready, they are heaved in. By holding one's finger on the line, one can feel, at all events in the fairly calm weather, when the sinkers strike against the cylinders. But I used to look at my watch, as it takes about half a minute for a sinker to go down 100 meters. The necessary data are entered in a book. On the morning of the 17th, then, the sails were clewed up, and the Fram began to roll even worse than with the sails set. We first tried taking soundings with a sinker of 66 pounds, and a tube for taking specimens of the seabed. At 2,000 meters, or 1,093 fathoms, or more, the line broke, so that sinker, tube, and over 2,000 meters of line continued their way unhindered to the bottom. I had thought of taking samples of water at 4,000, 3,000, and 2,000 meters, or 2,187, 1,639, 1,093 fathoms, and so on, and water cylinders were put on from 0 to 2,000 meters. This, however, took 6 hours. Next day, on account of the heavy sea, Only a few samples from 0 to 100 meters or 55 fathoms were taken. On the third day we made another attempt to get the bottom. This time we got specimens of the seabed from about 4,500 meters, about 2,500 fathoms. By the heaving in and taking of water samples, and temperatures occupied 8 hours, from 7 a.m. till 3 p.m., or a third part of the 24 hours. In this way we should want at least 9 months on the route that had been laid down, but as, unfortunately, this time was not at our disposal, we once gave up taking specimens of the bottom and samples of water at greater depths than 1,000 meters, or 546 fathoms. For the remainder of the trip, we took temperatures and samples of water at the following depths: 0, 5, 10, 25, 50, 75, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, 400, 500, 750, and 1,000 meters. Or 0, 2 3/4, 5 1/2, 13 1/2, 27, 41, 54, 81, 108, 135, 164, 218, 233, 410, and 546 fathoms. In all, 15 samples from each station, and from this time forward we went on regularly with one station every day. Finally, we managed to heave up 2 water cylinders on the same line by hand, without great difficulty. At first this was done with a mortar and sounding machine, but this took too long, and we afterwards used nothing but a light hand winch. Before very long we were so practiced that the whole business only took 2 hours. These 2 hours were those we liked best of the 24. All kinds of funny stories were told, especially about experiences in Buenos Aires, and every day there was something new. Here is a little yarn. One of the members of the expedition had been knocked down by a motor car in one of the busier streets. The car stopped, and of course a crowd collected at once. Our friend lay there, wondering whether he ought not to be dead, or at least to have broken a leg, so as to get compensation. While he lay thus, being prodded and examined by the public, he suddenly remembered that he had $50 in his pocket. With all that money it didn't matter so much about the compensation. Up jumped our friend like an India rubber ball, and in a second he had vanished in the crowd, who stood open-mouthed, gazing after the dead man. Our speed on this cruise was regulated as nearly as possible, so that there might be about 100 nautical miles between each station, and I must say that we were uncommonly lucky in the weather. We made 2 fairly parallel sections, with comparatively regular intervals between the stations, as regular, in any case, as one can hope to get with a vessel like the Fram, which really has too little both of sail area and engine power. The number of stations was 60 in all, and 891 samples of water were taken. Of plankton specimens, 190 were sent home. The further examination of these specimens in Norway will show whether the material collected is of any value, and whether the cruise has yielded satisfactory results. As regards the weather on ship, it was uniformly good the whole time. We had a good deal of wind now and then, the seas rolling, but for the most part there was a fresh breeze. In the south-east trade we sailed for 4 weeks, at a stretch without using the engine, which then had a thorough overhauling. At the same time we had a good opportunity of smartening up the ship, which we needed badly. All the iron was freed from rust, and the whole vessel painted both below and above deck. The decks themselves were smeared with a mixture of oil, tar, and turpentine, after being scoured. All the rigging was examined. At the anchorage at Buenos Aires, nearly the whole ship was painted again, masts and yards, the outside of the vessel and everything inboard, both deck houses, the boats and the various winches, palms, etc. In the engine room everything was either shining bright or freshly painted. Everything hung in its place, and such order and cleanliness reigned that it was a pleasure to go down there. The result of all this renovating and smartening up was that, when we fetched up by the quay at Buenos Aires, the Fram looked brighter than I suppose she has ever done since she was new. During the trip the holds were also cleaned up, and all the provisions restowed, and an inventory made of them. A whole suit of sails was completely worn out on this voyage. But what can one expect when the ship is being worked every single day, with clewing up, making fast and setting of sails, both in calms and winds? This work every day reminded me of the corvette Alida, when the order was all hands aloft. As a rule, though, there was only clewing up the sails that had to be done, as we always had to take soundings on the weather side, so that the sounding line should not foul the bottom of the vessel and smash the apparatus, and we did not lose more than one thermometer in about 900 soundings. On account of all this wear and tear of sails, Roald was occupied the whole time, both at sea and in Buenos Aires, in making and patching the sails, as there was not much more than the leeches left of those that had been used, and on the approaching trip to the ice barrier we should have to have absolutely first-class things in the roaring 40s. June 30th, 1911, is a red-letter day in the Fram's history, as on that day we intersected our course from Norway to the barrier, and the Fram thus completed her first circumnavigation of the globe. Bravo, Fram! It was well done, especially after the bad character you have been given as a sailor and a seaboat. In honour of the occasion, you had better dinner than usual. And the Fram was congratulated by all present on having done her work well. On the evening of July the 29th, St. Helena was passed. It was the first time I had seen this historic island. It was very strange to think that the greatest spirit of 100 centuries, as some author had called Napoleon, should have ending his restless life on this lonely island of the South Atlantic. On August 12th, when daylight came, we sighted a little Martin Vaz Islands ahead, and a little later, South Trinidad. In 1910, this island was passed on October 16th. We checked our chronometers, which, however, proved to be correct. From noon till 2 p.m., while we were lying still and taking our daily hydrographic observations, a sailing ship appeared to the north of us, lying close hauled to the south. She bore down us and ran up her flag, and we exchanged the usual greetings. She was a Norwegian bound for Australia. Otherwise we did not see more than 4 or 5 ships on the whole voyage, and those were pretty far off. Never since leaving Madeira, September 1910, had we been troubled with animals or insects of any kind ever. But when we were in Buenos Aires for the first time, at least 500,000 flies came aboard to look at the vessel. I hoped they would go ashore when the Fram sailed, but no, they followed us, until by degrees they passed peacefully away on fly paper. Well, flies are one thing, but we had something else that was worse, namely rats, our horror and dread, and for the future, our deadly enemies. The first signs of them I found in my bunk, and on the table in the fore saloon. They were certainly not particular. What I said on the occasion had better not be printed, although no expression could be strong enough to give vent to one's annoyance at such a discovery. We set traps, but what was the use of that, when the cargo consisted exclusively of provisions? One morning, as Roald was sitting at work making sails, he observed a shadow flying past his feet, and, according to his account, into the fore saloon. The cook came roaring, "There is a rat in the fore saloon!" Then there was a lively scene. The door was shut, and all hands started hunting. All the cabins were emptied and rummaged. The piano, too. Everything was turned upside down, but the rat had vanished into thin air. About a fortnight later I noticed a corpse-like smell in Hazel's cabin, which was empty. On closer sniffing and examination, it turned out to be the dead rat, a big black one, unfortunately a male rat. The poor brute, that had starved to death, had tried to keep itself alive by devouring a couple of novels that lay in a locked drawer. How that rat got into that drawer beats me. On cleaning out the provision, whole nests were found with several rats in them. 6 were killed, but at least as many escaped. We have a whole colony. A reward was promised of 10 cigars for each rat. Traps were tied again, but all this did very little good. When we were in Buenos Aires for the second time, we got a cat on board. It certainly cut the rats down, but it was shot on the barrier. At Hobart, we provided a few traps, which caught a good many, but we shall hardly get rid of them altogether until we have landed most of the provisions and smoked them out. We have also had a lot of moths. At present, they have done nothing beyond eating a couple of holes in my best trousers. During the whole of this cruise, we had a fishing line hanging out, but it hung for a whole month without there being a sign of a fish, in spite of the most delicate little white rat that was attached to a hook. One morning, the keenest of our fishermen came out as usual and felt the line. Yes, by Jove, at last there was one, and a big one too, as he could hardly haul in the line by himself. There was a shout for assistance. "Hi, you beggar! Come and lend a hand. There's a big fish." Help came in a second, and they both hauled all they were worth. "Ah, he's a fine glistening fish. It'll be grand to get fresh fish for dinner." At last the fish appeared over the rail, but alas, it was seen to have no head. It was an ordinary stockfish, about 3/4 of a yard long, that some joker had hung on the line during the night. That we all had a hearty laugh goes without saying, the fishermen included, as they took it on good part. As a fishing boat, the Fram is on the whole not very successful. The only fish we caught, besides the above-mentioned stockfish, was a real live fish, but unfortunately it fell off the hook as it was being hauled in. According to the account of eyewitnesses, the fish was 6 feet long and 1 broad. Now we don't fish anymore. On August 19th, the hydrographic observations were brought to an end, and a course was laid for Buenos Aires, where we anchored in the roads at midnight on September the 1st. End of section 35.